Find a spot and get as cozy as you can. Now, you look like a bunch of smart kids. So who remembers who we were talking about the last time I did a children's lesson? Yeah? No, not quite. Does anybody else remember? Yeah? Well, we did talk about these people, but that wasn't the last one that I spoke about. No one remembers? Yeah? Say again? Abraham. Who agrees that Abraham was the one? Show of hands. Everyone has hands, right? Who thinks it was Abraham? Nobody back there thinks it was Abraham? Well, that was actually a trick question. So why don't you kids turn to Genesis chapter 13 for me? Are any of you guys good readers? I only need you to read 2 words. Who wants to read 2 words? Raquel? Really loud. Chapter 13, verse 1.
And Abram.
There you go. And Abram. So who was it that we were talking about? Abram. Everyone else was right. All you kids were wrong. That was kind of a trick question. You know, God changes his name to Abraham. So it is really the same person. But we're going to keep reading about Abram. And he hasn't changed his name to Abraham yet. Still, he's Abram. And it says in chapter 13, verse 1, "And Abram went up out of Egypt, he and his wife, and all that he had, and Lot with him, into the south. And Abram was very rich in cattle, in silver, and in gold." So the last time we read about Abram, he was leaving a famine, and he ended up in Egypt, right? Because they had lots of food there. Well, now he didn't have a very good time in Egypt, but it's time to head out. The Pharaoh had sent him away. The last verse of the last chapter, Pharaoh had sent him away, and he was getting ready to leave. And now he's leaving, and he's going into the south, it says. And he was very rich. Verse 3, it says, "And he went on his journeys from the south, even to Bethel, unto the place where his tent had been at the beginning, between Bethel and," I don't even know how to say this word, I think, something like that, "unto the place of the altar which he had made there at the first. And there Abram, called on the name of the Lord." Can I tell you guys a secret? Even I sometimes get this one wrong. And a lot of times when I'm reading Abram, I'm going to say Abraham, and if I do, you can correct me, because I fall for that trick too. So Abram, he's going back out of Egypt, he's going back the way he came, and he went to Bethel. And that was the place where, when God first sent him into the land of Canaan, that's where he first came to, and he pitched his tent there. And you know what he did there? We talked about this quite a bit when I've been up here getting to teach children. He worshiped. He called on the name of the Lord. He worshiped there. Now the name Bethel, do you guys know what that means? The word Beth means house of in Hebrew. Beth means, or am I getting that wrong? Yeah, no, that's right. House of. I know this because my wife's name is Beth Ani. So Ani means figs. So my wife's name means house of figs. Do you guys know what El means? E-L in Hebrew? It means God. So who's really smart here? Who can put those together? Do you know what that means?
House of God.
That's right. He was going to the place called House of God. You put your hand up so fast, I pick you all the time. I got to give some other people a chance too. But he's going to the house of God. That's the name of the place. Well, between the house of God and Hai. And he's worshiping there. He's worshiping the Lord. Now, he's bringing somebody else with him, someone who came from the beginning. Lot also, which went with Abram, had flocks and herds and tents, and the land was not able to bear them, that they might dwell together, for their substance was great, so that they could not dwell together. So Lot actually has I think it's his nephew here, and his nephew and everything that he has. Now, you know, when we look at this, it's easy to think that it was probably just Abram and Lot and maybe a few other people. There probably wasn't many of them. That's kind of the way that I view it, until you actually start hearing about some numbers. Now, if you had to guess, if you were just going to throw out a guess there, how many people do you think Abram had with him?
Thousands.
We have a smart one down here. He says thousands. You know, in the next chapter, we read about Abram going to battle, and he brings over 300 trained servants who were just trained to fight. Those were just the ones that were warriors. Now, on top of that, there was women and children and probably some elderly. So he probably had well over 1,000 people with him, just Abram, not to mention all of his flocks and herds. It says he was rich not only in silver and gold, he actually was rich in cattle as well. He had lots of beasts with him too. So when Abram was pitching his tent, he wasn't just setting up 1 or 2 tents. If we were to look at it from the outside, it would probably look like a big tent city, a big village of people. And that was just Abram. Now on top of Abram, there was also Lot, and all of Lot's, the people that were with Lot. Now we're going to keep reading here. We're going to find out that there is a problem in this little tent city. And there was a strife between the herdmen of Abram's cattle and the herdmen of Lot's cattle. And the Canaanite and the Perizzite dwelled in the land. So now there wasn't only Abram, right? There was Lot, but all of Lot's men too. Now they were so jammed together in this little area in Canaan here that they couldn't even get along. They were fighting. The herdsmen of Abram's cattle and the herdsmen of Lot's cattle, they were saying, this is my water. Well, no, this is my water. And they both wanted to water their own herds to make sure that their master had good, healthy, strong herds with lots of water and food. The land couldn't keep them all. That's how many cattle there were. And there was also the people who lived there already, the Canaanites and the Perizzites, it says. Let me make sure I got that right. Canaanite and the Perizzite, they dwelled in the land. So there's a lot of people here, and this is a problem. But Abram has a solution. He said unto Lot, let there be no strife, I pray thee, between me and thee, and between my herdmen and thy herdmen, for we be brethren. So he doesn't want there to be quarreling between them over just the cattle. I don't think Abraham was very, see, I did it again. Abram, not Abraham, Abram was very rich in all these things, but I don't think these riches were the things that really gave him joy. And I think he enjoyed that fellowship that he had more. But he said, we shouldn't let this get in between us, the herds and things like that. That's not right. So why don't we separate? And he says, is not the whole land before thee? Separate thyself, I pray thee, from me. If thou wilt take the left hand, then I will go to the right. Or if thou depart to the right, then I will go to the left. And Lot lifted up his eyes and beheld all the plain of Jordan, and it was well watered everywhere, before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, even as the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt, as thou comest unto Zoar. So Abram says, how about we split up? You just look around and you find the place that you think is the most prettiest, loveliest place that you can find, and you can pick that and I'll go the other way. That's fine. And Lot did that. He looked around. He wanted to see what he could find. And you know what he spotted? The plains by the Jordan. Now, I think there's a pretty interesting phrase here. He says that it was, let me find it again. It was well watered, the plain of the Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere. A few lines later, it says, even as the garden of the Lord. Do you know what he's talking about when he says the garden of the Lord? Yeah? The Garden of Eden. Now, oftentimes, I have this mindset too where I think, well, the garden must have been so pretty, we probably would never see anything like it on this earth that would be as beautiful and as majestic. Maybe that's true, that this place wasn't quite as nice as the Garden of Eden, but it was pretty nice. And I think there's still probably places in this world that are so beautiful and lovely that it's almost like you get a taste of the Garden of Eden, and this was one of them. It was so lovely and well watered, and there was all sorts of good things there, even as the garden of the Lord. Well, that's what Lot chose. Verse 11, then Lot chose him all the plain of Jordan, and Lot journeyed east. And they separated themselves, the one from the other. So that's where he chose. He chose the good, very fruitful land, like the garden of the Lord. And Abram, in verse 12 it says, and Abram dwelled in the land of Canaan, and Lot dwelled in the cities of the plain, and pitched his tent towards Sodom. But the men of Sodom were wicked and sinners before the Lord exceedingly. So that very pretty place, apparently Lot wasn't the only one who thought it was a nice place to live, because there was lots of people there. There was some cities there. We probably remember the names, Sodom and Gomorrah. And it already tells us here in verse 13, or in chapter 13, that these cities were exceedingly wicked. Now, do you guys remember why God destroyed the earth when Noah was with Noah, when he saved Noah? Yeah?
Because everybody was wicked.
That's right, because they were wicked. Remember, they filled the earth with violence. Now, you think that maybe they would remember some of these lessons because they all came from Noah's descendants, but they had already forgotten a lot of these things by the time we're reading about Abram. And the people of Sodom and Gomorrah, they were very wicked. And we're going to find out later that the Lord was not pleased with what was happening in that city. And the sad thing is, this is where Lot went to live. This is the place Lot chose. And, well, maybe I won't get too far ahead of myself here, but verse 14 says, "And the Lord said unto Abram, after that Lot was separated from him, Lift up now thine eyes, and look from the place where thou art northward, and southward, and eastward, and westward. For all the land which thou seest, to thee will I give it, and to thy seed forever." So this place where Abram was, he was to look around. He was to look in every direction. And he said, everything that you see, I'm going to give it to you, Abram, and to all your descendants. They're going to get to keep it forever. Now, how long is forever? Do you think that maybe after a couple thousand years, God forgot about his promise, and then they're not going to have that land anymore? You know, when God makes a promise, and especially it's not conditional here. He doesn't say, I'm going to promise you if you do something or do anything else. He just promises them that this is going to be their land forever. We can count on that promise, that God will keep his word. "And I will make thy seed as the dust of the earth, so that if a man can number the dust of the earth, then thy seed shall also be numbered." That's a lot of people. When he says seed, he's talking about his descendants. And then did you know, well, I won't get into it in too much detail. I didn't really find the verses, but the New Testament tells us that if we believe, if we have faith in the Lord Jesus Christ, did you know we're of Abram's seed too? Maybe not in the same way that his actual physical descendants are, but we're his seed by faith, because Abram was a man of faith. And you know, I think part of this promise is I don't believe that we're going to inherit the land in the same way that his physical seed will, but do you know, we get to inherit a lot of other promises and joys in Christ Jesus, and that came from Abram's seed, because Jesus is Abram's seed as well. And some of the promises that God made through Abram, he made through his seed, Jesus Christ. And if we're in Jesus, if we believe in him and we're in Jesus, we get to be part of that, the children of faith of Abram's seed. Verse 17, "Arise, walk through the land in the length of it and the breadth of it, and I will give it unto thee." So God says unto Abram, you know what? Abram, just go up and start walking around. You're going to get to see the place that you will inherit and your descendants will inherit, and you can go explore this place. Now, do you think Abraham said, well, Lord, I'm a little busy with my flocks and herds. I've got lots of people here I got to take care of. I'm just going to do it when I get a little bit of extra time. We don't think that's what Abram did? No? Should we read what he did? Verse 18, "Then Abram, I did it again. See, I'm bad at this. Then Abram removed his tent." You know, it doesn't say he waited a long time. He just heard the Lord telling him to do something, and he said, all right, Lord. He packed up his tent. First thing, he removed his tent and came and dwelt in the plain of Mamre, which is in Hebron, and built there an altar unto the Lord. So he said, okay, Lord. He packed up his tent. I should have looked how far away it was. I didn't look. But he just packed up and he moved, and he said, all right, Lord, I'll go. And he ended up in a place which is, we would know as Hebron, and he built there an altar unto the Lord. Now the next chapter, we're going to read a little bit of the next chapter too. It's a little more reading than there is explanation going to go into this one. It's kind of a story in a way. We probably won't finish the chapter, but we'll read a few verses. "And it came to pass in the days of Amraphel, king of Shinar, Arioch, king of Elasar." Now I'm going to give you guys a heads up. I should have done this before I even started reading. There's some names in here that I cannot pronounce. So if I mess it up, then you're just going to have to forgive me. I don't know if you guys know how to pronounce it. Maybe you can correct me. But Chedorlaomer, king of Elam, and Tidal, king of nations, that these made war with Bera, king of Sodom, and with Bersha, king of Gomorrah, Shinab, king of Admah, and Shemaber, king of Zeboiim, and the king of Bela, which is Zor. All these were joined together in the vale of Siddim, which is the salt sea. 12 years they served Chedorlaomer, and in the 13th year they rebelled. So here we hear about 4 kings and 5 kings. So the 4 kings, they were the ones who were kind of the lords and the masters in this situation. In this last verse, it sounds like the hardest one to pronounce is the one that was kind of the top dog, the biggest, strongest king there, Chedorlaomer. And he was the one that was kind of calling the shots amongst the other kings. But there was these 4 kings, and the other kings, they served Chedorlaomer and these other kings for 12 years. Who here is 12 years old? Who's under 12? Let's put it that way. Who's 12 and under? Yeah, just think of that. It was your life at least all of your life. That's how long that these people serve these kings. That's a long time. That's no joke. If somebody works in a job for that long, for 12 years, that's a lot of time to spend in the same job doing the same thing. By that time, you can be an expert at a thing. So when you think about it, these 5 nations and all the people in there, they were probably experts at serving Chedorlaomer and all those other kings. But they got sick of it. They wanted a different job. So we're going to find out what happens. And in the 13th year, they rebelled. And in the 13th year, they rebelled. So they said, we're not going to serve you anymore. We're going to be our own bosses. And then in the 14th year, Chedorlaomer and those other kings said, we've had enough of this. Said, you're not going to serve us? Well, we're going to see about that. Well, they came, Chedorlaomer, and the kings that were with him, and smote the Rephaims in Ashtaroth Karnaim, and the Zuzims in Ham, and the Emims in Shaveh Kiriathaim. Oh man, there's some names in this chapter, isn't there? And the Horites in Mount Seir unto El Paran, which is by the wilderness. So these kings, it sounds like they weren't very happy campers either, right? They didn't have their servants anymore, and they said, well, we're going to go get these guys back. But on the way, they're not taking any prisoners. They're going along and they're destroying these nations. And the Horites in Mount Seir, I just read that, sorry. And they returned and came to En Mishpat, which is Kadesh, and smote all the country of the Amalekites, and also the Amorites that dwelt in Hazazon Tamar. So these guys are upset. They're just going around destroying nation after nation after nation. And finally they come out to these people who rebelled, these 5 kings who rebelled against him. And there went out the king of Sodom, the king of Gomorrah, the king of Admah, and the king of Zeboiim, and the king of Bela, the same as Zor, and they joined battle with them in the vale of Siddim. So now these 5 kings are going against 4 kings. I wish they would tell us how many there were in these kings' armies. It doesn't tell us. So we really have no idea how many people were in this battle or anything like that. But it would be some interesting information to have. But they joined battle with Chedorlaomer, the king of Elam, and with Tidal, king of nations, and the other kings. I'm just going to say that because it's going to save me some trouble. 4 kings against 5. So the 4 kings who were the rulers are fighting 5 kings who rebelled, and they're about to do battle. Now, if you heard that 4 kings were going to go to battle against 5 kings, who do you think would win?
5 kings.
You think so? 5 kings? That's why it would be nice to know how powerful these armies were, right? Well, they joined battle, and the vale of Siddim was full of slime pits, and the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled. So those 5 kings, Sodom and Gomorrah were among those 5 kings. They didn't stand a chance. The 4 kings defeated them, and by the sounds of it, it doesn't even talk about a battle hardly. They just sounds like they fled, and there was slime pits there. And they fell there, it says. It doesn't even say what happened if they fell into the slime pits. It sounds like maybe some of them fell into the slime pits. Some of them probably fell by the sword. But it didn't go well for those 5 kings. And they that remained fled to the mountain. And they took all their goods of Sodom and Gomorrah and all their victuals and went their way. So these, when you hear about 5 kings going to battle against 4 kings, it sounds like, man, that would have been a pretty mighty, heroic thing that was happening, a big fancy battle. But you know what? They just got turned around and they fled. And it says they fled to the mountains. They didn't even go back to their cities. And it was probably the men who went to battle, right? But they just found a mountain and they said, look at that place. I bet we can hide there and they won't find us. They just took off to the mountain and hid themselves in the mountain. Maybe they were living like cavemen until all those other kings went away. We don't know. We can only guess. But they left their cities empty for those 4 kings to just come and take everything. And that's exactly what happened. It says they took all the goods of Sodom and Gomorrah. They took all of it, all their goods, and all their victuals. That's like their food and their nourishment things. They took it all, and they went their way. And now this is where they made a mistake. They made a big mistake. In verse 12 it says, and they took Lot, Abram's brother's son, who dwelt in Sodom, and all his goods, and departed. So they didn't just take everyone else, they took Lot. Now, we're going to find out that Abram has a big problem with this. And there came one that had escaped and told Abram the Hebrew, for he dwelt in the plain of Mamre the Amorite, brother of Eshcol, the brother of Aner, and these were confederate with Abram. So this one man, he escaped this battle, and he fled, he found Abram. I guess he knew that Abram and Lot were related. He found Abram and he told him. Now, Abram has some allies, and Abram and his allies, they're not having any of this. These 4 kings just rampaging around, destroying everything and taking all this stuff. They say, no way, Jose. Verse 14, and when Abram heard that his brother was taken captive, he armed his trained servants, born in his own house, 318, and pursued them unto Dan. So he had 318 warriors amongst him, and he armed them. You know what that means when he says that he armed them? Who knows what that means? We'll give somebody else a chance. Yeah? That's right. He gave them weapons, swords and spears and other things that they can use for war. He armed them, and then they started chasing. They followed these guys' tracks. They probably weren't hiding their tracks because they had a big army, right? There was 4 kings. They weren't afraid of anything. But Abram and just his 318 servants, they started chasing them down, following them, and they were going to find these guys. Now, this is why I would love to know what these armies were like. It doesn't tell us how big the army was, how strong it was. I think if we knew how strong the army was, it would make it seem even more miraculous to us what happened. It doesn't tell us, so we can only guess. But I won't speculate too much. We're just going to keep reading a few more verses here. Verse 15 says, and he divided himself against them, he and his servants by night. So he has a plan. He finds them, but he doesn't attack them right away. He waits until night, until they're sleeping, they're tired. They probably had a long journey. You know, Abram's men had a long journey too, but they had a mission now. The other people were probably getting lazy. They were enjoying all the victuals that they had. They probably had full tummies full of all that tasty food they stole. They had all those people that they took along with them. But Abram, he wasn't going to rest. He waited till night and he split up his forces. So if this was Abram's army, he said, you half go on this side. This half go over there. And when you hear my call, then we're going to attack. So he divided his forces and he smote them. You know, those 3 words is all it says. That was all it took for Abram to defeat these guys. He divided his forces and he smote them, just with 318 guys. And he did have a few of his allies here. We don't know how many of his allies, how many men they brought with them, but I don't think there was very many. But they just took care of business. The thing that those 5 kings couldn't do, Abraham did. Or I did it again. Abram did in 3 words. He smote them. He destroyed them. It was no big deal. Then after he destroyed them, he pursued them unto Hobah, which is on the left hand of Damascus. Now, when you read things like this, it's very easy to not really understand what's happening here. Now, Dan and Damascus are not close together. So he's in Dan, close to where Dan would be in what we know as the land of Israel. Now, he smites them here in the night. He destroys them. Now, after this, he chases them down. So these 4 kings, they're running away, trying to get away from Abram and his 318 men and his few allies. They're trying to get away, and they're just running as fast as they can to Damascus. And Abram is chasing them down. Who can guess how far that is from Dan to Damascus? How far do you think would be a long way to chase after an army just to kill a few extra people along the way? How far do you think would be a far distance? Yeah?
A few thousand miles.
Well, that would be very far. It's not that far. That would be very far. Yeah, well, just think if you had to run it. If you were going to be running after somebody just to kill a few extra people, how far would it be far, yeah? 5 kilometers, you think? It's over 50 kilometers. Do you know that? 50 kilometers. Do you know how long it takes to run 50 kilometers? If you're a good runner, if you're like the fastest runner in the world, you could do that in maybe 3 or 4 hours. Well, maybe faster than that, I'm not sure. But if you just were running as slow as I could, it would take you like 8 or 9 hours to run that far. Now, they're not just running. They're carrying swords and spears, and they're killing these soldiers along the way for 50 kilometers. Now, they had a vendetta against these guys. They weren't going to let them get away. They chased them down all the way to Damascus. Verse 16, and he brought back all the goods, and also brought again his brother Lot, and his goods, and the women also, and the people. So Abram and these men miraculously rescued all these people out of the hands of the 4 kings in a mighty victory, and he brought them all back. And we're going to stop there. We'll finish that chapter up next time, verse 17. Thanks for listening, children.